it's Dr. Mira Brancu, host of the Hard Skills, and today we're talking with guest expert, Dr. Gena Cox, who will help us unpack why after so much effort we've put into diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI work, over the last 4 years, the results haven't moved the needle enough. Why? What should we be doing differently? And what are the missing pieces of this puzzle? This is not just another DE&I discussion. It is your roadmap to meaningful, lasting change built on psychological science that Dr. Cox will share with us. And it's perfect for season 5's focus on making a greater impact. Now, on this show, we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, that's where the name comes from, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, group and team facilitator, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of Millennials' Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigating their own leadership complexities. Now, before I introduce Dr. Cox, I do want to make one quick announcement that for the next 2 weeks, we've opened up a new 10-week leadership accelerator. It's called FUEL, which of course I have to have an acronym, you know, folks. So, which stands for Focused, Unstoppable, Empowered Leadership. It's made for high-performing, high-achiever misfits who have a hard time with pacing and overdoing things and stand out, maybe in ways they don't want to right now, but ways that are incredibly impressive, and we want to bring the best, but they want to make a more intentional and strategic approach to their next leadership role, even if they haven't identified what that role is. So we have 5 spots open. You can learn more and enroll by September 19th by going to gotowerscope.com and clicking on Leadership Community Programs and then clicking on Fuel. We start September 23rd. Would love to have you part of it. Okay, without any further ado, Dr. Gena Cox. She is an organizational psychologist, leadership advisor, coach, and speaker, passionate about creating inclusive workplaces. With over 25 years of experience, she helps leaders optimize company culture and employee experience to retain top talent and deliver their financial goals. Her strategies have helped clients reduce voluntary turnover by up to 4% annually, narrow employee engagement, score gaps between groups, and see improvements in collaboration and innovation. She is the author of award-winning book, Leading Inclusion, and her ideas are featured in business media, including Fast Company, Forbes, Business Journal, Harvard Business Review. Her PhD is in industrial and organizational psychology. So welcome and great to have you on the show, Gena.
Oh, Mira, it's so good to be here. I should call you Dr. Brancu. You know, us psychologists, we work really hard to get those degrees, but it's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really great to have you. We can now that it's official, we can call each other by first names.
Yay!
Okay, so in your experience, so actually, let me start with this. You wrote this book in 2022, right? That's post-pandemic. You were tracking how the implementation post George Floyd was going when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Once there was kind of finally a renewed energy around it, right? And as you've been tracking, it seems like the results of all of these efforts have not necessarily completely come to fruition just yet, right? Mm-hmm. And so what are the most common challenges leaders face when they are trying to create these inclusive workplaces and trying to apply these new frameworks?
Absolutely, Mira. So I saw exactly what you just said, which is that many leaders had really good intentions that came to the fore that caused them to focus on this issue in a new way after both Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed in 2020. And so that's laudable. Unfortunately, though, I would have to say that the main hindrance I perceive and have sort of studied at this point now for years to progress towards building this ideal of the inclusive organization was that, number one, it turns out that inclusion really tops diversity. what many leaders were doing was they jumped right out and said, we need more diversity in our organization. We need more square people, more triangular shaped people, more round people, whatever they decided. And then they went full force to try to enhance the diversity of these target groups. The problem was that they had laid no foundation. And so when the squares and the triangles came into an organization that previously had only ever seen rectangles and only understood rectangular behavior, what I observed and what many others have documented is that often those employees did not stay. It felt to them like maybe there were the 11th person at a dinner table that was set for 10. Where's my fork and where's my plate and where's my chair? And you invited me to the party, but it doesn't seem as though you really expected to make room for me. That was one of the major problems that has caused a lack of progress, because even though there might have been initially some improvements in diversity, what tended to happen was that those employees did not stay in those organizations, or they stayed and reported low levels of engagement as a result of the experience. Another thing that tended to happen was the hiring of the chief diversity officer. And for all of you listening who are chief diversity officers, I have absolutely nothing against you. There's nothing wrong with chief diversity officers. The problem was that organizations were sort of just doing lip service. They wanted this role in place so they could say they were doing something. And so they hired individuals into organizations absent any kind of overall enterprise strategy about what the role was intended to accomplish. And then the roles were not given the political clout that was necessary. They weren't given the financial resources that were necessary, and often found themselves sort of dangling on a limb where the minute something went wrong, they got the blame as being ineffective in their roles, when really they were never set up for success. Those are two significant factors. A third factor, though, that really gets in the way is that this is the kind of thing that needs to be led at an enterprise level. And so, as I said, nothing wrong with chief diversity officers, but only if they're set up within an overall system that says, this is what we're solving for, here's what we'll know when we're making progress, and everybody in the organization is moving towards that. Which, of course, also means, Mira, that the CEO and the C-suite and the board have got to lead this from the top. And that was something that was often missing.
Yeah. So many important points that you made, and I just want to sort of highlight. Number one, I heard the sort of leaning into quantity, but not enough quality. The quantity being diversity numbers, but the quality being all around what's the experience of people once they're promoted into higher level positions, for example, right? And that quality wasn't there, right? And then the second I heard was the chief diversity officer hired out of lip service, but not with fully resourced capabilities to actually implement all the things. And then the last was willingness to readjust the system, which includes full support and visibility and engagement from the top.
Absolutely. You nail those three things. And by the way, those three things are still happening.
Yeah, well, because I think some of it is it's easy to just place people in situations and then take your hands off the wheel, right? But what happens to the car when you take your hands off the wheel?
That's right.
Right.
And I've spoken to many leaders who have good intentions. In other words, I sincerely believe that if you run an enterprise and you have to think about this issue. In fact, recent data coming up from Sarah Mount and other organizations indicate that, a majority of executive leaders believe that they should focus on these issues, and they will continue to focus on these issues regardless of what you might read in the popular press. However, there is a gap between that desire and the actions they take that has to do with number one, not really understanding what are the critical, what really matters, some of the things I talked about earlier and others, but also there is a broader sort of political environment that is relevant to the conversation, in that sometimes leaders just want to kind of keep their heads down with regard to this issue. But this is not one of those issues, I think, where you can make progress if you're not prepared to lead from the front.
Yeah. And you're right. The desire is there, but it takes much deeper understanding to actually implement really anything, anything of success. With success is you need to understand everything that is required to be able to be successful. And this is one of them. This is not just like, some random additional thing that you're implementing. There's a science behind it, right?
That's right. In many ways, I count the clock of this current era in this conversation. I count the clock from March of 2020 when Breonna Taylor was killed, and we can talk about that if it makes sense. But that's when I start the clock. So if we say March of 2020, we're really talking about 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. I consider us in this era where we really only had 4 years when top level leaders in American businesses had agreed that this was an important issue. The issue was not new, and it wasn't new in 2020, but between the passage of the Civil Rights Act and all the Civil Rights Act legislation in the 1960s up until 2020, generally speaking, leaders did not deal directly with these issues. I remember working, for example, as an advisor where we were analyzing employee experience data and making significant contributions to the activities of a C-suite. But what would happen was that often the HR departments would keep the data that was cut by gender, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ plus status, and so on. They would keep that in a separate report, and it never got reported to the C-suite. And so often those leaders just didn't even know how bad this problem was, and discovered, maybe for the first time in 2020, how bad the problem was in their organization. So, I think we all have to give each other grace, and we have to recognize that this is something where the understanding of it is very new. Those leaders weren't taught about this, in their MBA programs or wherever they were taught to lead. Nevertheless, they also have to think about the possibility that it is not rational that you would attempt to lead this kind of work or approach it in any way different than you would approach any other enterprise strategy that really matters for your business. And that doesn't happen either.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a million questions in my head, but at the cost of derailing us just a little bit, since you opened the door, I'm going to ask, why count from Breonna Taylor's murder? Why start there? I'm just very curious.
That's where I start, because that was the event, that was the occurrence, that was the horror that changed my life personally. When Breonna Taylor was killed, I could not understand. Literally, my brain could not process. What do you mean? She's in her room, she's in her bedroom, she's shot by cops, she's dead in her home. Like, that didn't even seem like it was possible. And the other thing about Breonna Taylor was, I thought, she could have been my daughter. And so it had a profound emotional effect on me. And it was the primary precipitating reason why I wrote that book, Leading Inclusion.
That is really meaningful. Yeah. And we all really do need to think about this from a meaningful, personal perspective, right? This is not just some random thing that organizations may or may not do. It's personal to people's lives and livelihoods within organizations, and what they're bringing home with them from those organizations as well. So let's put a pause right there. We're reaching an ad break, and I'd love to continue this conversation after the ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Gena Cox, author of Leading Inclusion. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Gena Cox, author of Leading Inclusion. Now, Gena, I want us to go through some of those challenges that you mentioned, starting with this, what I call quantity, not quality, inclusion, topping diversity is how you termed it, right?
Mhm.
When we sort of earlier stages, it was called D, E, and I, starting with diversity. And that seems like hyper-focused then on diversity. And all of a sudden, like we didn't pay enough attention about the equity and the inclusion pieces of that acronym. So later on, what I've noticed is that some folks started changing the acronym to put and more emphasis on the things they felt like were important. So EDI, we've seen that, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? I've seen IDEIA, right, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and JEDI, which adds justice, right? But you have an interesting framework, REDI, ready. Let's talk about that one. What are your thoughts on what's important when you created that acronym?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say the acronyms matter and they don't, right?
Yes. Right.
I am not wedded to any of those acronyms. And I tell people that it's a distraction to be too worried about what the right acronym is
Totally.
or isn't.
Yes.
Because by DE&I, when someone says what's DE&I, I don't say, well, of course I say diversity, equity, and inclusion because that's the acronym. But what I say is that DE&I is really about healthy work cultures, effective leaders, and positive day-to-day employee experiences. It's about these three fundamental experiences that every employee should have, including the triangular people who work mostly around square people or what have you. Everybody should be able to have those things. And so fundamentally what I'm saying then is that DE&I, as I think about it, is really a leadership obligation. It's not a moral obligation, it's a leadership obligation. And so I've thought this way for a very, very long time. But as I thought about my own experiences of people who look like me, stories I had heard ever since I came to the United States, because I think having come to the United States at age 21 was helpful in that it gave me sort of a pre and a post, something to compare, to know that things didn't always have to be exactly the way that I was experiencing them here. But anyhow, so because I think of this whole idea as this leadership obligation, one of the things that was clear to me as I was consulting to organizations for decades is that there was something going on that was preventing some people from seeing some other people in their full humanity, their full worth as humans. Something was getting in the way, certainly in the way for the police officers in those extreme circumstances and so on. So I became fascinated with this concept of respect. And I'll tell you another thing about respect that was evident to me. Again, I think because I was an immigrant to this country. And that is that when I came to the United States, I realized that people responded to me as a Black woman, like Gena is a Black woman. So everything that people thought they understood about me, how people related to me, what they thought I would do and not do, I came to see was primarily predicated on how I looked, which was a new experience. Okay, so once I understood that, I had to try to figure out, well, how do I get to be a good Black woman? Because I don't even really know what that is. And I'm being a little facetious because these are things that happen over time. You don't like wake up one day and start analyzing this. I'm getting to the point, believe it or not. And so as I had been thinking about this, I could see that there was this thing, some barrier, there was something getting in the way. And then I discovered, lo and behold, that when I talk to Black Americans who have lived only in this country, there's a word that they use so often that it's not even thought about, and that's the word respect. People will routinely say things like, you better put some respect on my name. Or they might say, you don't have to like me, but you will respect me. I mean, that is said so often that there's actually language around that is used in a very informal way within communities that are primarily African American, meaning that shared experience of being descendants of slaves in this country. So anyway, of the enslaved in this country. But so the respect thing I knew was important. And as I did some research in preparation for my book, it really wasn't specifically focused on respect, but there was a question that I asked, which had to do with what is it that you would want your leaders to know about your experience in their organizations from an inclusion perspective. People had a lot of things to say, and I noticed that the responses from Black Americans were much longer. There were more responses. They had a lot to say, and a lot of it really just, in the end, when I content analyzed it, in the end, what they were talking about was this respect thing. In other words, imagine then that inclusion has a lot to do not just with, am I paid fairly, do I get the job I desire, and all of those things. What if it really has to do with, do I believe that when I show up, you see a whole full human in front of you? And so the R for respect, I just thought needs to be at the front of any acronym that we use to describe this work. So I just kind of slapped it in front of the of the EDI. And I say slapped because you can tell I don't expect people to start necessarily using REDI and replacing DEI, I don't think it matters. What matters most is that they think about putting respect first.
Yeah, I love and really appreciate how you described how you came to identify this specific experience as kind of the crux of if we could adjust this, how much can we change about our organizational health and experiences? And that really resonated, not just like at a human level for me, but also just, from my own anecdotal experiences, also working with leaders and when talking with Black women and their experiences, right? Yeah. And so, but I'm curious, because I feel like sometimes there's so many definitions of respect. When people say so-and-so is not respecting me, I don't feel respected. I constantly wonder, but what does that look like for you? Because I think it looks different for different people, right? Yeah. And so what did you learn from the stories that you gathered in your research? I know you mentioned, do I believe that you see me as a whole person? What goes into that?
Yeah. So, there are all kinds of psychological studies about the concept of research, and also they exist in sociology and they exist in anthropology and in the law even. So research gets studied a lot. But most people agree that, in fact, yes, there are different kinds of respect. The kind of respect that I'm talking about, though, is this idea that I'm not talking about the earned respect, the kind of respect that comes by virtue of having done something and people go, oh, wow, like that's called earned respect. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about the kind of respect that just is a sort of any human being on the planet is entitled to. And based on the work that I have done and what I have studied, when I think about this definition of respect, I think about it in terms of, does a person feel seen? Do they feel heard, and do they feel valued? And being seen, of course, is all about sort of being acknowledged. Sort of you show up in the place, and even just a nod or eye contact lets you know that this person recognizes they're seeing another human there that exists in this space, and therefore should be noticed. Being heard, of course, is about having space to both express your ideas and believe that others are doing something with them. So you can express ideas, people accept the ideas, they listen to them, they act upon them, and even in some cases give you credit, when the idea is yours. So it's more about sort of the expression of your, it's not more about your impact in wherever you're operating. Are you able to have that impact? And being valued, it's not just about, compensation and pay, although we think about those things and those things are important. When I think about being valued, I think about it in terms of recognition as well. I think about things like opportunities for promotion and visibility, opportunities to have those jobs that everybody, everybody knows are at the top of the pile. They could be the revenue generating jobs or the product development jobs, the more glamorous kinds of things, versus always having the jobs that are sort of in the basement, or to think about a movie that I can't think of the name of the movie, but there was a very funny movie about that idea once. So being valued is about this notion that you get the chance to be optimized, and for whatever that means, and of course it differs for person. So when I think about respect, I'm thinking about these things in that way, and I like to talk about them in that way to sort of encourage people to just use that as a shorthand to help them remember, what does it mean, what to do. It's not really an abstraction. I'm trying to make it sort of more concrete so people can just remember these 3 ideas, and if you do those things, the odds are you're good in your interactions with every other person.
Yeah. I really like that additional word that you used, optimized. Like you're pulling at the best of what people have to bring, instead of sort of shutting them out or ignoring their talents or underutilizing their talents. You're seeing them for all of the things that they could bring to the to the organization. Is that kind of?
It is. And Mira, do you know why that is so? So absolutely right. You're hitting the nail on the head in terms of my intentional, emphasis. And I emphasize this idea because what I know, based on data from a variety of sources, including an organization called CoQual that has done a lot of research in this area. I think there's also been a lot of work done on this at McKinsey, is that for people who come from traditionally underrepresented groups in corporate life, what we know for a fact is that they get less feedback than other people. They get less feedback partially because of this social distance between them and those people who could give them the feedback. And I'll quickly tell you the story about the time I was giving a talk, and a wonderful man came up to me afterwards. He was a young man, a young leader, and he came up to me afterwards, a white male, and he said, I have this Black woman on my team and I don't know how to lead her. And I said, tell me more. And he explained that, there were some things he would like to see her do differently, but he was afraid to tell her those things. Well, why are you afraid to tell her? Well, I'm afraid of how she's going to react if I tell her these things that she doesn't necessarily want to hear or might not want to hear. I said, well, what do you do with the other people on your team when you have the same issue? I tell them. And I said, well, here's the thing. How you manage a Black woman is how you manage a white man, a purple person. Like, everybody needs the best leadership from you, which is to say, right now you're shortchanging her because she doesn't know what she's doing well, nor does she know that she's about to fall off the edge of a cliff. How could she ever excel? So that issue of the way that I think about respect creates an opportunity to kind of bridge the gap to get to the key outcome that really matters, which is help me do my best.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're reaching another ad break, and we just got done talking through what does inclusion really look like from the perspective of respect. At the individual level with each individual person. The next thing, when we come back from the ad break, I'd really love to go to the next challenge that you had started off with, which is the Chief Diversity Officers. Where are we going with this? What to do? Do we do something different? Why have we missed the mark? Would love to sort of explore that with you when we come back. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Barrancu, and our guest today, Dr. Gena Cox, author of Leading Inclusion, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Gena Cox, author of Leading Inclusion. All right, so where we left off, personally, I would probably want to deep dive for the rest of the call just on this, but I'll just put it out there that if you want to learn more about simply how to, as a leader, demonstrate to someone that you're seeing them, you're hearing them, and you're valuing them, reach out to Gena, okay? Because it sounds easy, but I've seen so many leaders miss the mark that it is a hard skill. It is an important skill. Reach out to Gena, just saying that. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to follow up on is we've talked about the Chief Diversity Officer, and we've now seen backlash with the Chief Diversity Officer positions, where I've seen like layoffs that are sort of removing that position, or budget challenges that are sort of like, let's just remove that. And it's very frustrating to see, but perhaps there's new ways, and perhaps there's still other ways to do this. So I'm really curious to hear from you. What are you interpreting about this, and where do you think we can go from here?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I will say won't sound very optimistic, but then the second thing I'll say will sound very optimistic. So when I hear these conversations about backlash, I have to be very cautious, because as I said before, in the big scheme of things, even if you just count from 1966 till now, this pattern of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back is not unusual. That is what always happens. And we happen, unfortunately, though, to be in an era where, in this case, the 3 steps forward has been met with a very, very dramatic pushback, more dramatic than I have personally experienced in my 25 plus year career, and more dramatic than I think we have seen at any other point, absent, literally, before the 1960s, when some of these opportunities did not exist at all. In other words, the progress that was made from 1966, it appears as if there are some forces that are determined to sort of push that all backwards. And so DE&I has become the boogeyman for that. It's a way that people use the language to say this has something to do with reverse discrimination, although the words reverse discrimination are not used like they used to be used in the 1990s. So all of that is very real. And what is very alarming to me is that a lot of this effort is being funded by billionaires, very prominent billionaires, which is why I say that a person like myself doing my work in my little corner of my house, in my small clientele and so on, and trying to have people think differently, I don't spend any energy fighting against that backlash. I cannot win that. I don't think anybody can. So I do think this is where the optimism comes in. We've got to figure out, how do we keep moving forward in spite of whatever is going on in the forces that we cannot control. And I think that that means is that this kind of work is going to evolve. Now, some of the evolution is evolution I have longed for. For example, when I talk about how you can't just hire DE&I leaders, put them in a box over to the side and think that that's solving any problems. That can't that's going to not happen anymore because, well, first of all, there won't be as many of those positions. There won't be as much support. But I think it's become more evident that one way that this work could survive is if it were integrated into all the other strategic priorities that we have. This is one part of everything that we do, and we factor it in, and we ask our leaders and everybody in the organization to behave in a way that is consistent with whatever values we create for the organization that support a healthy culture, an inclusive culture. So again, it has to start from the top. That is to say then that there would be people doing some of these things that have to do with culture, things that have to do with leadership, things that have to do with employee experience and how they relate to inclusion in a distributed fashion, not just residing within one role or one function within an HR department that has questionable power in the first place, power and authority. So I think there's that. I think another way that these things will change is that, oh, I didn't mention this other barrier when we talked at the beginning, only because I didn't want to make a list that was longer than 3. But one of the other big mistakes that I saw happening was the proliferation of employee resource groups. There's nothing wrong with employee resource groups at all. But there's something wrong when those groups were created as the strategy. Like, oh, we'll create this group. People will do whatever they need to do in those groups. We don't need to know what it is. Problem solved. Everybody's happy. So those kinds of things, ERGs are going to evolve dramatically because what started to happen as a result of their mismanagement from the top, I think, is that there started to be this fighting within the ERGs and then fighting between people in ERGs and people outside of ERGs. Well, how come I don't have an ERG? Or how come they get resources to focus on this thing? Nobody's giving me resource. Like that's not sustainable, right? So ERGs will evolve to do what one of my clients does so very well, which is use the ERGs and define the membership, however, but making it open to anyone who is interested. But these groups are going to become sort of the channels for growing in the members of the group to become the most effective members of the organization that they could be. So developing their interpersonal skills, their leadership skills, their communication skills, and so on. I have a client that does this so very well. I mean, they just say workforce development is a priority. And this is how one of the ways we get it done is within these ERGs, but it's not based primarily on identity. And then I think the third thing that will certainly change, well, that I hope will change, is that DEI has been a segregated profession, segregated by race and segregated by identity. I'd like to see more white males, very specifically saying white males. It's not an accident, but until anybody thinks that he or she can make a positive difference and have a viable career in work that supports inclusion is always going to be a dead end opportunity, right? So I think that's something that would have to, I don't think that can change overnight, but I think it's something that would have to change in order for this work to really have the impact that all of us who care about it desire.
Yeah, the thing that I'm pulling out of that in addition is right now, it seems like the backlash partly is people feeling quote unquote excluded or left out.
Yes.
Of each of these groups. And that, the support is relegated to a specific function and focused on a specific identity. And for those of you who are not familiar, ERGs, employee resource groups, it's focused usually on some kind of identity, like focused on a women's group or Black leaders group or something like that. And what I'm hearing from you, which I also am pulling out some hope from this, so I appreciate your validation plus reassurance around this, is what could be next. The next iteration is just recognizing if one group suffers, we all suffer. And if one group and we like all groups succeed, that is of benefit to all, right? Like if we could pull out the very best, if we could develop the very best out of all of our employees, then everyone wins. It's just trying to sort of extract ourselves out of the us versus them, othering of people, scarcity mindset kind of stuff too. I'm pulling some things you haven't mentioned, but this is kind of where my head is going with it.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I will tell you one thing though, and that is that the outcome for all of this is really going to be determined. Part of this whole idea of the us versus them, or people feeling excluded, part of that is legitimate and real. Like it's almost an automatic human reaction, right? So that part seems very normal. But what some people have done is sort of gin that up to the point where it's become a point of, sort of a point of contention, because in fact we could address this problem, address the problem of some people feeling excluded without at the same time fighting against those who we've been trying to help. The two things are not mutually exclusive, but that is how the equation has been set up currently. And so I say that because I don't want to be naive as I talk on this conversation. I think there's some very powerful financial interests and people with power who really would prefer that we just have a fight about this as opposed to find a solution. And so those of us who have good intentions just have to keep focusing on the good stuff and pretend like we don't know, although that stuff is very real.
Yeah, I wonder if we just ignore those very large powerful influences, the billionaires who, not all billionaires, okay, but the billionaires who are focusing on trying to keep the status quo in a certain way. If we sort of focus away from that, do we have the power to do that? Maybe this is the question in my mind. Do we have the power to do that? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, and I think that's the question that I ask myself every day, and I have to answer yes, because if I answer anything other than yes, I would just stay in bed with the covers over my head and not do anything for another day. I mean, there was a period of time, I live in the state of Florida, and this conversation comes up so much. And there was a period of time where I was like, somebody said to me, well, can you sell your book in Florida? Like, can you talk about inclusion in Florida? And it truly felt like a very sort of personal thing. I had to get past that. I had to realize, I had to force myself to say, I will do the one thing I can do. I will do that. And then I'll do it the second time. I'll do it the third time. And I had to keep telling myself that. I would imagine, and I'm not the spokesperson for these people, but DE&I leaders across this country are probably some proportion of them are thinking, I just have to get out of this altogether because I got to take care of my kids, my family, and I can't be living wondering every day if I'm going to have a job tomorrow. So I am the optimistic, idealistic one who says that we can, and we have to be clever and think about new ways and make the adjustments, some of which we've talked about. We can't just keep pretending like it's not there. But and when I say ignore, I don't mean pretend like it's not there. We have to be smart about, well, what are alternative things that we can do, actions we can take.
Absolutely. What is in our sphere of influence?
Yes.
We talked about this on a previous episode. You can get really burned out thinking of all of the things that you can't do, but there are plenty of things we could do in our own sphere of influence. And let me tell you, Gena did just fine with her book. It's award-winning. She succeeded on that front, even with those fears, right? Because she knew what was in her sphere of influence as well. So we're reaching an ad break. We'll be right back in just a moment. with our guest, Dr. Gena Cox. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Broncu, and our guest today, Dr. Gena Cox. So, Gena, we went through sort of like exploring the focus on inclusion and seeing the whole person through the respect lens. We thought through like where are we going with everything if the Chief Diversity Officer position is too much for just one or a small group of people and not resourced well enough. And you, in your book, you talk about this sort of like biggest level of organizational impact, which is kind of like making inclusion scalable. What does that mean and what would that look like? And have you seen it? I would love an example if you've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, I wrote, the title of my book is Leading Inclusion, Drive Change Your Employees Can See and Feel. And throughout the book, what I'm trying to say is that none of this is possible if it isn't led from the top of an organization. So even when I think about scalability, I'm not thinking about something abstract. I'm thinking about individual members of executive teams, individual members of boards of directors who, number one, believe that this work is necessary. They could believe it's necessary. I think it's a leadership obligation, and that's sufficient. But they might think it's a financial necessity, given the fact that they might be trying to, make money in marketplaces that are diverse and need to really understand as much as they can about a more diverse market and therefore a more diverse workforce. They might be thinking about this from the perspective of innovation. They might be thinking about this from the perspective of patient experience, like my clients in the healthcare industry, and also registered nurse retention. I mean, there could be a variety of problems that challenges that an organization might be wanting to solve, where inclusion is just the ticket. Except that we don't always talk about it in that way. When sometimes clients call me up and they say, we want to do some work with our executive team to really start thinking about let's call it our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, or it might even say belonging, alphabet soup. So they'll say that to me. That's usually how it comes up, right? And what they don't know, I say, of course, and we have our pre-work and we plan the whole thing out. And then on the day when we get together, what they don't what they think is going to happen is they think I'm going to come out and they think I'm going to talk about anti-racism, and they think I'm going to talk about implicit bias training, and they think I'm going to say all, and some of those things will come up in the conversation. But what I actually am focusing and starting the conversation with is talking about, what is it that you want to accomplish as a business? Tell me what your financial strategic goals are for this. What is your vision for this business? What is it you want to accomplish? Because this whole idea of scalability hinges upon the notion that leaders begin to incorporate the conversation about inclusion in the conversation about their business priorities. It's part and parcel of all of it. You know, when I think about effective organizations and effective leadership, and I say, you know, when I say, well, what are, if, let's say we had a circle, a pie that into which we want to put the elements that are necessary for operational success in a business. And I ask leaders, what are some of the things that go into it? They'll always talk about finance and marketing and sales and product development and customer service. Always, that's the, you know, essential. They'll talk about those things. And if this were a ring, you know, and they put them like wedges of them into this circle, they'll be very happy with that. And then somewhere along the line, they would talk about humans. Somewhere along the line, it wouldn't be in the top 3 often, right, or top 4 even. Right. And so then I say, well, okay, we still got the circle. Where would you put the humans in that then? And they recognize you can't wedge the humans into any part of that ring. You have to now either put them in the core. Well, you could put them, you might think of them as a surrounding, but I say, what about if you think about them as being as the core of the donut, right? The donut hole is filled with humans. The humans are necessary to do all the stuff. And oh, by the way, what do those humans look like? And then what do you need? And what are the characteristics and skills and so on? And then how do they need to work together? And the conversation eventually, and then we start to talk about, well, what will you have to do from the top of this organization in terms of establishing the values that you are going to operate under that can deliver this future that you just said you wanted? And magically, the words respect and inclusion will come out of their mouths without my prompting them to do that, right? So brilliant. When thank you. Yeah, when I think about scalability, I don't think of it in terms of programs or initiatives at all. I mean, DEI programs and DEI initiatives. I think of it in terms of getting leaders to focus on what matters most, and then recognizing how they use humans of all types, you know, to accomplish it. And that's it.
That is just, it's brilliant, and it sounds so obvious, and yet it doesn't come to the forefront until you do an activity like that.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Yes. And it's practically the definition of organizational development is there's people driving all of the things that you want to accomplish.
Yes.
And how do you get those people to work at their very best, top of their level?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, there was one organization, there are 2 organizations, actually, 2 global organizations with which I've had the pleasure to work over the years. One of those organizations was run at the time by a gentleman who was a Sikh, and I might be mispronouncing that. I'm never, some people say Sikh and some people say Sikh, but S-I-K-H. And because of his personal values, he established corporate values. It was the X company way, that were focused and centered on the human experience, on respect, and these basic fundamental ways of interacting. That was his strategic commitment, obligation, definition to this company. This is how we're going to build to the billions that we want to get. And guess what? They did it. And that those values still exist. And the other company I mentioned, similar thing. So some people understand this idea for whatever reason, but some people undervalue this idea or don't think about it at all. And when I am invited by people to talk to startup companies that are early in their growth cycle, I get very nervous, because large companies, it is a bit easier in some way to think about these things because they have more degrees of freedom. But in younger organizations where the damage can be done by just one person's interaction with one other person, I think it tends to get undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably generating a lot of interest and probably more questions. And so I am curious, where, I'm going to pull it up on my screen as well, but where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, definitely. You can go to my website. It's genacox.com. Go to my link, find me on LinkedIn. I love talking to people on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in some additional resources that you can just grab, you can go to genacox.com/inclusion resources, and you can get some downloads from there. This is more though than just an initiative. When I think about this work, it's more than just thinking about DE&I initiatives. I consider this to be a way to be, an ethos. It's a point of view. It's a way you see the world. It's a mindset shift. So I call it, the respect ethos when I think about this, because I'm really thinking that if we operate in a certain way as we run our businesses and as we interact with each other in our communities. Maybe I'm being, one of those people with the rose-colored glasses, but I actually think this is how we get to this needed connection that the Surgeon General warns, that we absolutely need for survival.
I agree. And who cares if it's rose-colored glasses? It's exactly what we need. So, audience, what did you take away? That's what I took away. What did you take away from today? And more importantly, what is one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Gena? Share it with us on LinkedIn. We both live there. And so we would cheer you on if you share it with us right there. And talkradio.nyc is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place, as well as coming out from the live show into podcasts on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon podcasts. Please help us increase our visibility, reach, and impact by leaving a review, and definitely share this episode around when you hear it. The stuff we talk about on this show is part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap that we also teach in our TowerScope Leadership Academy, and that Fuel program I mentioned earlier on. You can find all of that at gotowerscope.com. And definitely be sure to look up Leading Inclusion by Dr. Gena Cox, as well as check her out at genacox.com. Thank you, talkradio.nyc, for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Branco, your host of the Hard Skills Show. And thank you for joining us today, Gena. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, everyone.